Please, sir, what's God like? That was the first time I was in a school class when I was working as a minister. I was with my then mentor, Ken Mackay, in Sighthill, and he had gone into a class to teach about Solomon, and at the end of his lesson he said to the class, have you any questions for us? And this hand shot up and said, please, sir, what's God like? An 8-year-old boy with a genuine question. And Ken, of course, looked at me and said, oh, maybe Mr. Dewe's got an answer to your question. And I think the blank look on my face maybe told him a completely different story. Please, sir, what's God like? That's not a question that is confined to 8-year-old boys or even to time which is nearly 40 years ago. That's a question which is a real live question for people now. There are some people who will tell you that God is a vengeful deity and that COVID-19 is his retribution on an evil world. Or there are people who will tell you that God has picked up the ball from the pitch and his coat and has gone home and said, I'm not playing anymore, and has abandoned his world to suffer and even to come to a crashing end, and God has gone away. The Bible tells a different story. There was a kind of grumpy conversation between Jesus and one of his friends, a man called Philip. And it was about the time just before Jesus died, and the disciples were coming to terms with the fact that Jesus wasn't going to be there anymore. And as part of that conversation, Philip said to Jesus, Jesus, show us what God is like. And I say it's a kind of grumpy conversation because you get the feeling that Jesus is saying to Philip, Philip, what do you think I've been doing for the last 3 years? And he said, you've seen me, you've seen God. You've seen me, you've seen the Father. And so he says to them that if you want to know what God is like, then look at Jesus. Now C.S. Lewis will tell you that kind of answer makes Jesus either what he says he is, the Son of God uniquely, or it puts him on the level of somebody who's delusional and claiming to be like a poached egg. Jesus claims to be the Son of God, and the Bible's whole testimony about him is that he is the one who shows us what God is like. So what do we see about God when we look at Jesus? Well, we see someone who is full of love and compassion. Jesus cared for people who were in need. He cared for people who were sick. He cared for people who were poor and needy. And so we think and see that is what God is like still for us. But we also see in Jesus someone who is able to do amazing things. The miracles that he did leave us to understand that he is able to do far more than we ask or imagine, that he is able to save us completely as we come to God through him. And also we see in one particular place that he pulls back the curtain for a moment, and we're able to see in Jesus something of the glory and the majesty of God. So when we ask the question, what is God like? Then the answer is we look at Jesus. We see in Jesus what God is like. The words and the works that Jesus has done are the words and the works of God himself. And in that story in John chapter 14, Jesus also invites us to trust him. He says, you trust in God, trust also in me. And that's where this leads us. In these days, that we learn to trust in Jesus and to trust in him to be the one who helps us, who saves us, who loves us, who cares for us, who listens to our prayers, and who is able to answer us. And that leads us to trust in someone who is dependable and worthy of our trust. And when we learn to trust in him in that kind of way, that in itself leads us to a sense of peace and hope in our hearts.